Back to another live stream. We've got Steve Keynes, he's back in the house. We've got Mike Radzicki, Tony Wilson, and Dave Folks. We're going to get them all on momentarily, but we're going to cover the role of economics today in the live stream. And specifically, we're going to talk about Steve's new book, Money and Macroeconomics from First Principles for Elon Musk and Other Engineers. And specifically within that, there's a chapter called Energy. Maybe it's the role of energy. I don't know. I'll get Steve to tell me about it in a moment.
You are now relearning economics.
So a lot of you probably have seen the name in the chat a lot, Tony Wilson. And he's a big energy guy. He's Australian. He's a little bit rough around the edges, but just like me, just so he's like a rough around the edges Australian. I'm a rough around the edges Canadian. So he's going to be in the house. He's all about energy. He loves it. He'll go on forever. We'll try to cut him off as much as possible because I'm a dick. And I do that. But first, I've got to bring on Steve because it's been 3 weeks now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi guys. Not bad. Just back from Asia, giving a course over there in Kuala Lumpur on system dynamics as applied to economics with the Islamic University. It was quite a lot of fun, actually.
Oh,
it's
cool.
My first live teaching I've done for, I do plenty of online stuff. This was face to face, and I gave 3 days of workshops. I was walking around looking at people's attempts to do modeling and real tutorial stuff that I haven't done since I left Kingston back in 2018.
What's it like, not teaching for so many years or kind of being in that environment? Is it like riding a bike? It just comes right back to you?
Oh, yeah. Look, I mean, I think I was born to be a teacher as well as a researcher. And it brings out the entertainer and the clown in me. So I learned my approach to public engagement by doing debating at school. I did school debates from year 7 to year 12. And did debating at university as well. And that is when I get up on stage, again, any teaching role, I go into my debating persona. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I think one of our first deep conversations we had, it was working on my ums and yeahs and oh yeah. And you said you conquered that yourself through the debating you did back in your younger days in university. I wish I did some university and learned how to debate. Oh, well.
Well, I think you've done pretty well without university anyway, mate. So I don't think you missed out on the lifestyle, but not necessarily the learning.
Yeah, all the partying in the dorms and all that. Yeah, good times, good time. My ums are getting better. There I go. Now I'm thinking about it. Tell me about Money and Macroeconomics from First Principles for Elon Musk and Other Engineers. How did that book come about? What was your inspiration for it?
Well, fundamentally, it was when Musk suddenly turned up in the bloody White House. I mean, if you've seen the movie Don't Look Up, part of the theme there is that the president has this ever-present billionaire to whom she panders and who tells her what to do. And suddenly there is Musk in the White House with Trump. And what is he doing but arguing by analogy that if they just like a household can go bankrupt if it spends more than it takes back and gets an income, so can a government. And one thing I remember, a certain young engineer, I think his name was Elon Musk, saying it's extremely important to reason from first principles, not to reason from analogy. Because if your analogy is correct, then of course that saves you all the hard slog of having to reason from first principles. But you're only going to know if your analogy is correct by reasoning from first principles. So it doesn't really save you anything. You're on a wing and a prayer if you use analogy when you have a wrong analogy, like making an analogy of a household to a government as he's doing there. So I thought, well, my whole approach to economics is based on fundamental and engineering concepts, systems of differential equations, dynamic processes, non-equilibrium, et cetera, That's bread and butter to anybody who designs rockets. A rocket is not an equilibrium process, anything but. You're constraining a far from equilibrium system to end up where you want it to be. And it's incredibly complicated. The mathematics is straight differential equations. I thought, well, let's write a book for Musk and take, rather than, having by analogy governments like a household, show the double entry bookkeeping. what happens in an integrated system when you have households and governments and banks and firms. And they'll also take macroeconomics from first principles. Don't listen to bloody Milton Friedman and his garbage analogies once more. Work from mathematical definitions and see what you get. And that's the whole style of the book.
Great stuff. We're going to focus on, we'll do more of your book over a series of live streams because it's a large book. But I think today we'll focus in on chapter 13, which is on energy. And we'll kind of dig into the Cobb-Douglas function, which I know you love so much. But before that, let's bring on Professor Mike Radzicki. Mike is in the house. I don't have claps. Here he is. So, Mike, how you doing?
Guys, doing well.
Good.
Just doing system dynamics and economics, and then 40 minutes or so, I'm going to start teaching that to the youngins again. So,
what are you teaching today to the youngins specifically?
we're going to cover the system dynamics national model and the controversy between economists and system dynamics, and how I've tried to resolve the controversy.
What's the controversy?
The very first paper in the field of system dynamics was an attack by Forrester on traditional economic modeling. It was back in 1956. It was basically an in-house white paper for the MIT faculty. Nobody cared. The next time the economists paid a little bit of attention was urban dynamics. And urban and regional economists kind of paid some attention, and there was some kerfuffle there, but not a lot. The biggie, of course, was the world dynamics and the limits to growth. That kind of got you onto the macroeconomics turf. And the economists went after Jay pretty strongly. And of course, Jay's an engineer, so he was first baffled, like, why are these guys so pissed off? But, he started battling with them back and forth, right? I came on the scene, and I was the one that told Jay, and then the economists, I said, economists kind of organize themselves into schools of economic thought. And you're talking to the wrong schools of thought, economists from the wrong schools of thought. Not every economist is going to hate system dynamics, but you're talking to people from the orthodox neoclassical schools. And your results are threatening their traditional results. All the economic growth models grow forever, right? There's no limits to growth. Technology always saves us. So I said, you got to talk to the right types of economists. And he bought into that argument. And that's kind of what I've been working on, is getting, what schools of thought in economics are most likely to at least have an open mind towards system dynamics. And of course, stock flow consistent modelers, post-Keynesians, institutionalists, ecological economists. There are some camps that'll give us a fair shake. Last point, you don't want to drop in and say, hey, you economists who might like our modeling technique, you're all wrong. We're right. We'll correct you. That doesn't work.
I still enjoy doing it.
Steve is someone who you could just see him as a 13-year-old taking a stick and whacking the hell out of a beehive.
No, I'd go for the wasps. The bees are actually useful.
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
African army bees or whatever they. So but can we work together? And the economists in the heterodox schools raise interesting points.
Yeah.
It's not like system dynamics is without sin. But you got to talk to the right folks. Long story short, sadly, the right folks don't dominate the economics profession.
Anything but.
Did Jay Forrester ever meet the right folks? Did he find that clique, that school in economics that was receptive to his modeling?
Yeah, in kind of his last conference that I chaired actually in New York in 2003, he made his last economics presentation, Jay, on the stage with some heterodox economists. Glenn Atkinson, who used to edit the Journal of Economic Issues, was on the stage, was very complimentary, but suggested ways we could work together better. And Jed Schilling, who had been an MIT PhD, but was working with Jerry Barney at the Millennium Institute with their system dynamics development economics model. So yeah, so Jay was aware of it, and he agreed that that's who we should be talking to, and he wasn't showing up at heterodox economics conferences or anything like that, but he would, when he'd make his presentations about the system dynamics national model, would mention heterodox economics. And he was also interested in the various pluralism and economics movements, the Kansas City proposal, the Cambridge proposal, the French students that Solow was battling a bit about at that era. So, and he said words to the effect that he had hope.
Hold on, hold on. Just fill me in here. What's the Kansas City proposal? I know the Cambridge stuff, but what's
a similar thing? The students, basically PhD students, some faculty got together and made a statement and sent it around to be signed and endorsed.
Okay.
And on sort of on Jay's deathbed, not literally his deathbed the day he died, but towards the end of his life, when we're talking, it's like 97, 98 years old, some of us would visit with him, and Khalid Saeed in my department asked him, what's your, looking back on all the things you've done, what do you think is your greatest achievement? And he said, changing the way economics is done.
Which has got a long way to go, but that's yeah. I mean, the intriguing thing is that paper he wrote in 1956, which, as you said, was just a presentation to the MIT internal seminar. It's as true now as it was 70 years ago, and in fact, probably even truer. Because all the things he complained about with the mainstream is more extreme now in the modern mainstream than it was back in the 1950s.
And what was interesting was he had no bias. He was just like, hey, I'm an engineer, and I've been paid to come over here and think for a year. So in a business school. So I started reading the literature on economic modeling, and here are my thoughts.
And they were pretty devastating.
And he was like, your stuff, he tries to be very polite in the paper, but he's just like, this sucks.
Yeah, I mean, just some points. I'll read a bit of that paper because it's worth putting into the record. So he says, during the last 3 months, I've read a small part of the literature on economic models and models of the industrial firm, considering at the point of view of one who is new to the field. One of the striking shortcomings of most economic models is their failure to reflect adequately the structure form of the regenerative loops in the economy. So they're not looking, they simply have consumers buy from firms. They don't have consumers buy from retailers who buy from wholesalers, who buy from firms, who've got the supplies, all the time lags and stuff that's missing. Then he says, present models neglect to interrelate adequately the flows of goods, money, information, and labor. That's elaborating on that point. Linear equations have usually been used to describe a system whose essential characteristic, I believe, arise from its non-linearities. Models suitable only for long-range prediction are often used with short-range influences and fluctuations omitted. This is justifiable only if the system is sufficiently linear to permit superposition, an assumption which has not been justified or defended and is probably untrue. It says many models are formulated in terms of systems of simultaneous algebraic equations. These impress me as particularly unsuited to the type of behavior being studied. He has a go at discrete time modeling, says time intervals of model solutions are often too widely spaced for the predictions being attempted. For example, a model solved annually to arrive at new annual values for economic variables would, if anything, be useful in predicting future trends over a 5-year period, but not year-to-year variation. As a rough rule of thumb, one would want solutions spaced closely enough to define a smooth curve through the fluctuations in which we are interested. And finally, this is a lovely punchline. Very often the model and its results are judged by the logic with which the model is derived out of its founding assumptions, whereas the failures probably lie in those assumptions.
That's why Jay Forster probably didn't make a lot of friends with conventional economics off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a pretty hard time doing it too myself, really.
All right, let's bring on Dave. He's read Steve's new book in its entirety, word for word. He knows every small detail. I'm going to ask him very deep questions about each chapter, and I want very detailed answers from you, Dave. Hello, Dave.
You are such a shit stirrer.
He's such a bastard. He said he was a prick earlier on, so being honest.
How you doing?
Not too bad. I'm breaking one of my own first principles. Congratulations, Steve, on the book, by the way.
Thank you.
But one of my first principles at the moment is not to talk about Elon Musk, and here I am. So we're going to have to. But since November, when he started wanting to buy elections, I got jack of him. I think everyone has their red line with Musk, and I've been sort of taking a hiatus from talking about him, to be honest, because he gets enough oxygen. But I think for the purposes of today, we need to, don't we? Because
we do.
The nonsense is piling up. I was really interested in. Thanks for the storytelling, Mike, on Jay Forrester. Just pretty amazing character. But it did occur to me when you were telling me about that, and Steve, his, and I was reading your book too about his observations of neoclassical economics, and you're like, one of the problems might be that the nuances of system dynamics, right, which seems to be able to model things more accurately, it's just you can't tell good stories with it, which you can with the regular economic narratives, are ones that people can just trot out so easily. That politically,
better parables,
better parables,
yeah.
Which is a real shame because, of course, the truth is not as simple as that, as system dynamics shows. Is there any hope that? I know, Ty, you've talked about this before. Is there any hope that you get to a point where the modeling is so, for want of a better word, accurate that we're able to treat economics more like a science like physics, or is that just never going to happen? It's never going to work like that.
Steve, I'll let you answer first.
I think we can certainly do a damn sight better than we're doing at the moment. This is the main problem. The neoclassical juggernaut should have crashed a century ago. It's useless for describing a capitalist economy, and system dynamics is at least useful for describing a capitalist economy. So that's what I found in putting the book together. There's so much about the system which involves amplifying feedbacks, which are left out of neoclassical thinking, non-equilibrium behavior, all this stuff accurately captures the real world. And my real fundamental insight on that was when I built my model of Minsky's financial instability hypothesis. And I did that in strict differential equations. I wasn't using system dynamics as a technique, but of course, what system dynamics does is build systems of differential equations. And in that model, I had simply had a three-state model. I had the wages share of GDP, which is part of income distribution, the employment rate, which gave you an idea of how much economic activity there was, and the private debt to GDP ratio, which gave you an idea of how levered the economy was. And very simple set of equations bringing them together. And what happened in the model was what's known as an emergent property in a complex system. If the system was going to lead towards a crisis, then on the way towards the crisis, the cycles in economic activity, employment, and so on diminished. And that was an incredible surprise. It wasn't something I programmed in. And I finished my paper with a reference to that phenomenon being quite unexpected. Well, lo and behold, about 5 years later, a neoclassical economist started talking about the great moderation, the diminishing cycles, and took credit for it, didn't have any idea that there was a private debt crisis about to break. So in that sense, system dynamics actually exposed the underlying nature of the economy in a way that had never been done before. So to me, yes, there is a very deep way in which the system dynamics can give us a fairly realistic model of capitalism as it functions and give us some capacity to forecast into the future, which is what Ty is doing now. So I'm throwing it back at you, mate.
And I'm going to throw it right to Mike because it's a relevant question for him. Can we get, system dynamic models to a point where it's, really hyper real? I think that was Dave's base question.
Mm-hmm.
So this speaks to some of my work over the years in tying system dynamics to the appropriate schools of thought. So institutional economics might be the school of thought most closely related to economics. And they do pattern modeling. So they are not trying to be social science physicists. And Jay always said, economics and system dynamics should be professions, not sciences. Professions like medicine and law. And so Jay always said a system dynamics model is a computerized case study. And then if you find any irregularities in different cases, those are generic structures. And if you find any commonalities in the generic structures, those are fundamental principles of systems. So it's inductive logic. You look at the real world first, find regularities, and build up to principles, as opposed to the neoclassical approach, where you deductive logic. You start with theory and you derive testable hypotheses, which means taking measurements, numerical data, and the like. And I'll give you a story that might land this on the aircraft carrier. So back when I was a youngin', I was invited to Jay Forrester's retirement party. Back then, retirement was mandatory at age 70. So there was a big thing at MIT, and I was invited to attend. And Jay was very young still. He died at age 98. He still had 28 more years. And so he was concerned about what's going to happen to system dynamics at MIT after he's retired. And his successor, John Sterman, at the time was not tenured. And it wasn't clear that John was going to get tenure. Now, he did get tenure, and he's, sidebar, he's now the Jay Forrester Professor at MIT. A professorship is named in Jay's honor, and John holds that chair. But at that time, it was unclear. Jay's going to retire. His successor might not get tenure. That is it for for system dynamics at MIT, and at that time, probably the world. So what they did, MIT's SD group opened up conversations with the Harvard Business School, because Jay always said a system dynamics model is a computerized case study. The Harvard Business School's thing is case study research. And so they were going to move the system dynamics program there and start to convert Harvard case studies into their equivalent system dynamics representation, making the cases dynamic. Example, People Express Airlines, classic Harvard case study. Don Burr, you could fly, CEO, he could fly for $30 from like Pittsburgh to New York City or something. No frills, no lunches on the plane, carry your own bags on and what have you. But sorry about that. And spectacular exponential growth, but then they burned everybody out. Your bags were going to California instead of New York, and the system collapsed. Classic Harvard case, John Sterman built a system dynamics game model of that, and you can run the airline. And Don Burr played it, and he said it's a very good representation of what happened. So they were going to try and, as Dave is kind of suggesting, are there parables or stories? Yes, absolutely possible. But of course, Jay retired, but John got tenure. System dynamics stayed at MIT.
Nice. And so my opinion, Dave, is that's a loaded question.
Always loaded.
Here's the thing, what did George Box always say? All models are wrong, but some are insightful. So I think we can get, system dynamic model to the point where we can say everybody would agree that it's universally insightful. And if you target specific models to a specific problem, as Mike would always say, you can probably find solutions, not analytically in the math, but you can find solutions to the actual real world problem, and it could be highly accurate, depending if you zoom down into a specific problem. As for our large national economy, like with any modeling technique, if you're going through time, the cone of uncertainty becomes wider and wider, and that will always exist. And another aspect of it, as I mature in a modeler, is admitting that you don't know all the variables to the system you're modeling. So if you're doing a very large model, unlike a very small model, let's say, versus a model of a factory process, a specific machine, and the people that work on that machine, you can pretty much identify all the variables to that system, the bounds of it, the constants, right? And model a very highly forecastable situation. Whereas in macroeconomics, even the best of us don't know all the constants. We don't know the true boundaries of the systems. We don't know all the stock flow dynamics, and we probably never will. Not because we're not smart enough, not because system dynamics isn't good enough, but the system is adaptive over time. So things are changing. So you have to always constantly change the structure of your model to identify that. But I think, pushing more and more people, especially the academic community, that it's very inductive, as Mike would say. If that's kind of pushed in the academic realm, you'll have more people researching. Okay, what kind of inductive data do we need? How does that translate into a dynamic model, into its functions, et cetera, et cetera? And we can get it very close, but I'll roll it all the way back to George Box's, quote, all models will be wrong, always wrong. And I'm paraphrasing here, but we can get them to a very insightful stage.
Is there a danger in so to the degree that, as an outsider, it seems that using system dynamics to describe economics seems to take a lot of the sting of ideology out of it, because you can just analyze what's there, right? As George Selgin said to you, Steve, I remember something. It was something like, "Steve, you and your double entry bookkeeping." I think that's what he said. "You and your double entry bookkeeping." It's like kind of like, well, yeah, it's just analyzing
exactly. Yeah,
as it exists.
Saying to a tennis player, "You and your bloody racket."
Yeah, exactly. It was so funny.
Yeah,
I thought, but maybe I've got a weird sense of humor. So, but is there a danger? Like, Steve, in your book, you got a chapter on loanable funds versus endogenous money.
Yeah,
and you're modeling both of them in Ravel. Is there not a danger that you can end up modeling stuff that's can be probably proved either way, if you see what I mean?
Well, no, it comes down to what is actually the
sense?
structure. Let's say because the thing that system dynamics lets you do, and this is Mike could be more familiar with this than I am. You're actually defining the structure of the model, the system. What you're trying to do when you build a system dynamics model is reproduce in computer logic the structure of the system you're trying to describe. And then what you find is most of the dynamics don't emerge from the spontaneous behavior of individuals, the usual Austrian thing. They arrive from the way the individuals are constrained by the system in which they're in. And so what you end up with quite simple behavioral rules reproduce the behavior of the system, because it's mainly the structure of the system that tells you what's going to happen next. So when I include private debt in the system, I get debt bubbles. And if you don't have private debt in the system, you won't see debt bubbles. It's because you haven't included the important variable. Whereas system dynamics makes it extremely easy to do that. So I took, for example, to build my model of Minsky, the financial instability hypothesis, I took the model that Richard Goodwin had built, which was a cyclical model where there was battles over the distribution of income between workers and capitalists. You only had two social classes. So what the part of GDP that didn't go to workers as wages went to capitalists as profits. And what Goodwin did was make an extreme simplifying assumption, and that is that that all profits are invested. Now, that's the best possible situation. Okay, capitalists basically investing, that's what you want them to do. And what you got out of it was a cyclical model. But I thought, well, it's not realistic to say capitalists invest all their profits. They invest more than their profits during a boom and less than their profits during a slump. So I brought that in first of all. And then I added in, well, if they're going to invest more than profits, they have to borrow money. So you get the rate of change of private debt as investment minus profits. And that then gave me the third three-dimensional system, which led to the manifestation of a global financial crisis. So the structure of the system, get the structure right, you'll get the behavior right. You don't have to fuss around with ridiculous behavioral assumptions, and very rapidly. And you can make the system more realistic at each stage. Neoclassicals will say, "Oh, we remove that simplifying assumption later and down the track." You should see the crap they hang on to force the system into equilibrium still. So the assumptions get more extreme, more unrealistic as they try to make a neoclassical model more general. The system dynamic stuff gets more realistic, and so does the behavior.
I was reminded of when I was doing art history. I was reminded of this. You're going to bring Tony on, eh? Just quick analogy.
Finish.
Go
ahead.
When I was studying art history, Max Ernst, as a famous German artist, his father was also a painter. And an early childhood memory that was burned in his brain was when his father was painting a scene outside his house. And Max Ernst pointed out to his father that one of the branches on the tree that he was painting didn't exist. And Max Ernst's father went out and chopped the branch off the tree so that it mimicked the the painting and looked correct. And
They
often,
made reality fit the model.
Exactly,
That's very
yeah.
neoclassical.
exactly,
Okay, right.
and
Yeah.
that's what it reminds me of when you tell me that story. Sorry,
Yeah.
Ty, you were about to just say.
Oh no, it's fine. My computer's really lagging right now, so I'm having difficulty doing anything relevant or even switching around things on the screen. I was gonna say I was gonna counter Steve and say that, well, with the perfect competition, neoclassicals are absolutely right, and that's that. But that joke's fallen flat at this point, considering
But I do like being really
couldn't get
big
my
on the screen.
Yeah.
Let's make me bigger.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay,
How
so
big do you
let's
want
bring
me?
let's that's a loaded question in itself.
Not one
I
you intend
can't seem to
answering. Yeah,
move
yeah.
You and
my
your loaded questions.
yeah.
What have we got here?
The new live stream. We're now called the Loaded Questions. So, anyways, let's bring
That's actually a
on.
good name for it.
Let's bring. Yeah, it would be. Let's bring on Tony's got a little slide deck today on energy, and I said, you know what, I'll give you time. You can put it out there. I'm probably going to tackle them with all my neoclassical and Austrian economic knowledge base, and really just pick it apart and tell them that energy doesn't matter in economics. It's just a load of baloney. So let's bring them on. Here is Tony Wilson. And now let's see if I can make you big, Tony.
Hey, Tony.
Tony, you're on.
How are
buddy.
you?
Mhm. Okay.
I'm on.
You combed your
I'm
hair and
on. You can
everything.
hear me. Fantastic. How are you all?
Good, mate.
All hanging in there
Yep. Surviving.
in the wonderful, wonderful countries that some of you are inhabiting, like Donald Trumpenstein and the northern neighbours there. And how soon are we
And
going to stomp you?
Yeah.
There's who's the Scottish comedian? Craig
Billy
Ferguson.
Connolly.
He had the solution for Canada.
Yeah.
Just put 20,000 Canadian hockey mums on the border with hockey sticks saying, you're not coming after my kids. That there's no way Americans would walk up to the border and go, okay, you're fine. It's your country.
We'll still come up for
That's
Tim
right.
Hortons. Though.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
Well,
only
we
because
shipped some Tim Hortons.
anywhere in America.
We shift Tim Hortons down there. We're already invading you guys. So, you aren't. You're on Australia. We'll ship some Tim Hortons down to
Well, they don't
Australia
have any
too.
down here. Yeah, I had
don't
plenty
have
of
any
Tim
Aus-
Hortons when I was in Canada.
Oh,
You forget I was in
that's
Canada
right.
for about 4 months.
Yeah,
a couple of years ago.
that was back when we didn't have
Saskatchewan.
better border protection back then, and we let you in. So I get how that could happen. Tony, you've got a slide deck here.
Yeah.
Let's get it on the screen. Let's do that. Run through your presentation and then allow me to pick it apart. Allow Mike to pick it apart. Remember, try to keep it fast. You know, we got live stream guests here. They get pretty inattentive pretty quick. It's a new world we live in where people want information fast. They want all the answers, and then they want to judge you on it. So let's throw that up on screen.
Yeah, hang on. Let me see. I've clicked the old share screen.
Let's see if I.
There we go. No, got it.
Make sure you hit
no.
hit the like button. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe,
Can you
and
guys
notification. Hey, Tony, let me do my
Can you
plug
see
for
it?
my channel. Let me
Okay.
do my here. We'll just do this. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe button, and notification bell so you get all my videos on time and you see my pretty face all the time. And if you're subscribed, you'll be with me until you die. Now, let's get Tony to present here. I'll bring up your full screen, Tony. I'm going to shut down the
Got that?
chat screen. And
Okay,
you can
'cause I
start.
can't see you guys.
Okay, well, that's okay. There you go.
Okay.
Can you see economists versus reality? Got it? Good.
We've got it.
Here we
Yep.
go. Okay, this is a quick bit of me. I've got a degree in aeronautical, astronautical engineering, 35 years of industrial control systems and automation. Before 2005, I did research and development and manufacturing. Since 2005, mostly mine site construction, which is kind of fantastic if you want to do a lot of things because you end up doing water treatment, power, solid waste processing, do all sorts of stuff there. I'm also trained in a couple of safety areas. One's called functional safety. That's the stuff where you try to keep nuclear power plants and gas plants from going bang. Electrical equipment for hazardous areas is so that you don't create sparks and blow stuff up. Right. In 2016, I got this funny little project into Australia's future energy.
Tony, you've got to go in presentation mode. We're just seeing the main slide here. You go to the next slide, or put yourself in presentation mode.
I can see my slides coming up. Oops,
I'm only seeing on screen as the actual.
You've got to share your presentation.
Yeah,
I did. I said.
Just hit F5, whatever go back to it and hit F5 so you go into presentation mode, because you're just showing the slides there.
Presentation F5.
F5, hit F5. That should do the job. It might be going in a separate window, perhaps. I'm just seeing the economists versus reality, the energy problem, Tony Wilson. That's what we're seeing. The actual slide you want to
go to the next slide.
Press page down. Press the page down key on your computer. Engineer not controlling his own presentation. Yike. What are the rest of you guys seeing? You're seeing the Tony Wilson slide?
I can see all my slides going.
I think you're choosing the wrong screen. I think you're sharing the wrong screen, Tony. So maybe go back and start sharing again and share the entire window, okay? Yeah. Righto.
We're back.
Trust us having technical difficulties here.
So this is what you need to do, Tony, to make this easy, is just share from the edit window itself and pan through the different slides. It's big enough to see.
That's what I did.
Screen.
Yeah. Where it says right at the bottom of your screen, it says screen sharing. Clicked on that, and it said window.
Yeah, don't choose a window. Choose a screen. Choose a whole screen and go presentation mode. Okay.
Right. Okay, I'm in entire screen. Can you see it? Ooh. Can you see me now?
No, once it comes to me, then I'll put it on screen, but you haven't gotten anything yet, Tony.
There we go. Can you see it now, Ty?
I can see we've got the infinite window of death.
So
now,
there we
go. There we go.
Yes, okay, we're in business.
Okay. Right. Okay. Page down. Oops, right. Yep. There's me. This is this 2016 project. What came out of it? We've got this aging fleet of power stations. The two photographs on the right there, the upper one is in Steve's home state of New South Wales. That's already been killed. And when they kill the next one, which is called Eraring, then Australia is going to have some really serious problems, because that one is just over 2 gigawatts. Eraring is nearly 3. What really stunned me was when I started looking through all of the history of our power stations. I had to go back to 1993 when our population was 17.6 million for when we had a power station over 1,000 megawatts. And that's pretty significant, because by the time I was doing that work, our population was 25 million and it's now 28. And we haven't replaced any of this stuff, and we're turning more off all the time. And there's the thing. In 2016, we were 24.2 million. We're 20.3. By 2040, we'll be 36 million, which is basically double the last time we built any of these large power stations. And this is what really scared me. At 2016, there were no proposals, let alone plans, to replace any of this stuff. And in engineering, everything eventually wears out. Your car wears out, coffee cups wear out, everything wears out, your computers wear out. It's got to be replaced, and you can't get away from that. When I was doing that project, this is the list of coal-fired. This doesn't include all of our power stations. This is just the coal-fired. There's 23 of them there. As of 2016, all 23 of those were running. But what I concluded was that the scary thing was that, and if you remember, for those of you who can remember the last time I was on, Steve brought up a graph of energy versus GDP for the whole world. And they parallel each other to, I think it's about, what's your correlation there, Steve? About 0.98.
The changes correlate 0.83 and the strengths are 0.998.
Yeah, it's ridiculous until you get to individual countries, in which case in the 90s, all of a sudden all the Western countries go flat on their power, but their GDP goes up. And the reason that is that in all of these countries, we got away with this because we shut down a lot of big energy users like manufacturing and automotive in particular, and we sent it all to China or somewhere else. And a lot of people don't realize it, but when you do the trace on all the energy, a car will only use this, that when you get to how much energy it takes to make a car versus how much it uses, making a car is the equivalent of about 20 to 25 years of usage. So if you're just churning over your cars every 5 to 10 years, the energy use in your society is just huge. What's happened since is that that excess energy that we came back into the system because we shut down manufacturing, well, we've been increasing at 500,000 a year, and they've just eaten through that. And this is where we're getting to this point now where we are running out of energy. Yes, we've put in huge amounts of renewables. Australia is one of the biggest renewables, but the problem is it masks the problem because it's not baseload supply. It's driven by Mother Nature, not by, we're going to shove more stuff into this machine and get power out of it. Yes, baseload gets mentioned in the media by our politicians, and I'll get to this. This is one of the giant problems in classical and neoclassical economics. They have this methodology, which I refer to as somebody else economics. Every problem is something somebody else is going to solve. And that's got really serious problems because whenever people come and say, hey, we should do this, we should build a power station, build a dam. Rory, what's his name? Rory Stewart, the ex-British politician, he mentioned recently, not only were Australia's power prices going up, he's got friends out here, but he said Britain hasn't built a new dam in something like 25 years. This is why they're running out of water. They just haven't kept up with how much water they need. And this is the sort of thing that's going on because economists have this bit of, if somebody says we should do this, they're like, no, nobody's going to do this. What we're going to do is wait till the market does it. I'm like, yeah, but hang on, the market doesn't do anything. We have this problem. Moving on. This is where we're at in 2025. We've got 2 that are turned off. We've got another 8 that are about to be turned off, which includes the top of the list there, which is a raring. That was scheduled for this year. They've just put it back 2 years because they're going, if we turn that off, we're going to be in trouble. Hazelwood, they're all going. The other big one is number 7 down there, which is your Lawn W. That's in my home state of Victoria. If they turn that off, Victoria will have Spanish events. Do you guys all remember what happened in Spain earlier this year?
The big blackout.
Yeah,
the big blackout. There's been a few people saying, oh, it wasn't this, it wasn't that, it wasn't something to do with renewables. It was absolutely to do with this sort of mismanagement, where they're taking out old-fashioned power stations, replacing it with renewable, and they're not doing the engineering properly, and nobody's listening to the engineers because there's been engineers all over the world trying to tell their countries that's the sort of thing that's going to happen. And it finally happened, and everyone said, oh, yeah, we know you guys have been saying this for a couple of years now, but we're still going to ignore you. And that's the big problem I've got in Australia right now, because I am talking to your old friends in the Labor Party, Steve, and so far they are not listening because Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister, is guess what? What's his degree? No,
economics.
He's a Labor, yes. Go and look at his resume. Here's the real problem. In 2040, that's what that list is going to look like. There'll only be 6 of them left on by about the mid-2040s, and they'll all be gone by 2050. And at the moment, there is not. And these are the facts. By 2040, we'll lose 80% of that, which is about 21 gigawatts. And that doesn't include all the other assets that aren't on this list. Australia's population will increase 28%, which means that we can expect a 28% increase in energy demand. And that doesn't include if we start to bring back any manufacturing or try to reindustrialize. People like Mark Blythe keep asking.
Hold on 1 second, Tony. Mike, you've got to go, buddy. Enjoy teaching the next generation of very smart people. We appreciate you. For
the next generation.
Thank you. Well, as my father would always say, if you bend the sapling when it is young and green, it will grow the way that you wish. Good to see you all.
Good to see you all.
Next week. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Mike.
Anyway, back onto this little one. Mark Blythe has made just about every talk he gets to at the moment, and I watch him quite avidly on YouTube, and I wish you guys really have got to have him on to talk about that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. He's a good bloke. I like Mark.
Look, if you've seen any of his talks on his new book on inflation, you really need to get him on as fast as you can. The other person I thoroughly recommend, or the other two, Gary Stevenson, absolute must, and Mariana Mazzucato to go on the stuff about the consultancies, because that's the other big giant problem. Now, Mark keeps trying to point out to Americans, if you're going to try and reindustrialize, in other words, you're going to try and bring back manufacturing, what does that mean? And he keeps saying, he just says, look, I don't know. What does it mean? Well, I can tell you one thing it means. You're going to need to build out your power infrastructure massively. And when I mean massively, I mean massively. And here's the big problem. At the moment, not only have most of the Western world got a shortage of energy, there's a shortage of the people who can actually build power stations, and there's a shortage of the companies that make the bits that go into power stations. Current time frame on a gas turbine is 5 years if you're lucky. And that's GE and Siemens are flat out building gas turbines at the moment. They can't make them fast enough. And because you need that, if anybody's heard of the inertial problem, that's one area where gas turbines are super. And my prediction is that hydrogen, because we've now got gas turbines that go on hydrogen, that's another topic for another day, that's going to be massive. Fact 3, these bases we've got no plans. That's my other really giant bug. In the 8 years since I did, 8.5 years now since I did this study in 2016, we still don't even have anybody with an actual proposal. And the one I'm trying to get your Labor boys to listen to, Steve, if you've got any people in there, please give them a call and say, hey, listen to this guy. Give this guy his 1 hour or whatever. You'll either think he's crazy and shoot him, or you'll go, oh, my God, this guy's right and he can save the country. Because what they're doing with renewables can't work. The Spanish have proven that. Fact number 4. Now, Steve will know about this project, Snowy 2.0. Yes, it's going to help with our problems, but it's a storage system, not a generating system. It's also got its costs well out of control, and that's also another giant problem from the economists. And here's the other thing, is that renewables will not replace any of this kind of power station because they're not base load. In anybody's power grid, you have all of the end users on one side, and you've got the generators on the other side. And the generators have to react and respond to what the users are doing. And you've got people turning stuff on and off all day long, day, night, whatever. You can't have it be the other way. And the problem with renewables is they can't respond well because they're driven by the wind, they're driven by the sun. And those two things are doing, the wind is doing its thing, the sun is doing its thing, and it just won't work. You need to have something else in there, and the engineering term for that is buffer. And what we mean by buffer is it's something that smooths out. If you've got something that's irregular on one side, you need it regular on the other side, and it doesn't matter which way you're going. A buffer is the thing that smoothens it out. And that's why I think hydrogen gas turbines are going to be a huge thing, because the problem with batteries is that if you look at, say, the Liddell power station that I showed you that photograph of earlier, that's been replaced by a 750 megawatt hour super battery. At the 2 gigawatts that Liddell could put out, that super battery will last, I think it's 23 minutes, 24 minutes, and it's
All right.
Right, so it just won't do the job. That's fundamental to it. So where did this all go wrong? There's 3 ideas, 2 are hidden, 1 is in plain sight in neoliberal dogma. The first thing is that neoliberal ideology is based on the concept that the rest of the population are a problem that economists have to manage. This is most evident by the dogma of independent central banks. I know that one's going to get me some backlash. But the comment about that economists think the rest of us are problems that have to be managed, that's straight from Mark Blythe. He says that and says that often. The second thing is that neoliberal economic ideology is dominated by the concept that markets fix anything and everything. And there's so much evidence to prove that just doesn't hold true. It's never held true. Why they keep doing it, Steve, that's one you can try and answer at some point, on why they refuse to give up the idea that markets can fix. And it's the anything.
Oh, because they fixed everything in 2008, solved everything. Good old markets.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. It was.
We're joking. Keep going, Mark.
Your sarcasm didn't translate there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry.
I apologize that I had to let an Australian know somebody was being sarcastic.
Fucking Kiwis.
Go and shag one of your sheep. Dig a good one.
Oh, well, I
only have to go to Wales. It's not far from where I am in Hemel.
Yeah. Okay. And here's the third one, is that GDP is the only indicator that matters. And this is why, to somebody like me, GDP is a load of garbage. If you look at a basic block diagram of an economy, you've got a household, you've got the government, the house has got trying to have savings go, it's got income, it's got savings, it's got private debt. Over on the other side of it, you've got goods and services. Everybody, there's cash going in all these ways. The government buys goods, buys services. The house buys goods, buys services. And the house, the goods, the service industry are all paying tax. But hidden underneath it is that everybody has a power bill, right? Everybody, including the government. Now, because we privatized it all, even the government has a power bill. And the power company wants to make profit. Milton Friedman, they do not have a social responsibility. Their job is to make as much money as possible. Now, during the election that Australia had a couple of months ago, there was this big discussion over the Liberals accused the Labor Party of saying, you said you'd reduce everybody's power bill by so many $100. Ted O'Brien, who is a complete idiot, and I've got a 40-slide presentation to crush him out of existence. He, in a public debate, said, you said $1,000. They're paying, households are paying $1,000 too much. This is where the $1,000 is. It's in that particular line there. Now, here's the interesting thing. What's this box, Steve? What's in the red box?
Energy, I presume.
No. What does an economist call all of that?
GDP.
Bingo. Somebody's clever. Yeah, it's GDP, because GDP is a monetary measure of the total market value of all final goods and services, and power is a service. Right? So that's GDP. So what happens when power prices go up? GDP goes up.
Yeah.
And if you've got a nation run by economists and they're obsessed with GDP, what's the easiest way to have GDP go up?
Make
Just
more
increase
power.
Yep, just
Make
increase the
prices
power
go up.
prices. And Chris Bowen has bragged constantly about all the new renewables that Australia has put in. And if you actually look at the data that's available, our actual demand is actually it's increasing very, very slowly. The amount of power available is climbing through the roof because they're throwing so many wind turbines into the ground and solar panels on the deck. And you go, well, okay, when I did Econ 101, they said if you've got a reasonably constant demand and supply goes up, prices should come down. That's Econ 101, isn't it, Steve?
Well, I'm trying to forget it, but yeah.
Right, yeah, what they teach every economics student
Yeah.
first day. If demand is constant and supply goes up, so you've got more supply for constant demand, then prices should come down. That's Econ 101. They teach that in the first day, right? So if Australia has near constant energy demand, we've put in God knows how many $1 billion worth of wind turbines and solar panels and everything. Our available power generating capacity has actually gone up. So why did AEMO raise energy prices by 9% earlier this year? In fact, they did it just as the election started. Why would they do it? Why would they? According to Econ 101, prices should be coming down, and yet they bumped up prices 9%. Once you understand that increasing power costs increases GDP, that's why economists don't care about power prices. The problem is it's actually acting on everybody like a regressive tax, because when that happens, you've got more dollars there, you've got less dollars there for more expensive goods and services. So there's less to save, there's less to pay down debt. That's like, you don't have to actually do the math and the numbers for this. It's just plain bloody obvious. I've actually put this in front of some Labor Party staffers and they've fallen over. They've gone, holy crap, we need to deal with this. And it goes nowhere past them.
It's an inflationary pressure, right, as well, surely.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it hits the goods. And because if you turn around to whatever company supplying goods or services that their power bill goes up, they've got to put that onto their customers. It doesn't matter who they are. If you're a worker, and you say, hey, boss, I need some extra pay to pay for my increase in power bill, what is the boss going to say? He's going to say, well, look, I just got an energy bill too, mate, and the company's making less profit. How am I meant to pay you more money to pay your power bill? My power bill just went up. This is acting like a lamprey on an economy, and it's going this way all because neoliberal economists are absolutely trapped in these couple of mindsets. They won't let anybody fix anything because they think the magic hand of the market is going to suddenly fix things, and they're obsessed with GDP.
And they don't understand energy either, which is the point that that's in that particular chapter of my book. Yeah.
My memory of living in Australia also, though, was there's the energy sector, especially out of Western Australia, and all the resources there have a huge amount of lobby and clout. Yeah. I mean, look what happened to Rudd when he said, "Oh, let's do a super tax on the energy companies." He was out of power within weeks. Well, a couple of months, it was gone.
Yeah. Basically, what you need is somebody like me. You guys would know the sort of discussion forum Q&A that's on live TV. They need to have me on that confronting these people. They need to have somebody who doesn't care about them at all. Because I really don't. I don't give a damn if Origin Energy, AGL, and the other big companies, just Gemini or whatever, if they went bankrupt tomorrow, I would not care. If they turned around tomorrow and said, oh, you're making this hard, we're going to go somewhere else, I'll be like, fine, we'll pay you 25 cents on the dollar or 20 cents on the dollar for all your hardware, bugger off. I would tell them to get lost, because if you look at that drawing I've got in front of you right now, look at the far right-hand side there. We're all screaming. Around the world, everybody's screaming about their governments not having enough money. Well, if they're paying through the nose for power like the rest of us are, that means they have less money to spend on us. I mean, it's a really simple thing. This is the sort of diagram that should, Steve, I wish I could have gotten to you before you wrote that book, because this is the sort of thing that should be in it. It's just basically like, here's where the money's, when you look at energy, here's where it's all going. And once you see it from this perspective, without all of the other stuff of what is actually happening in goods and services and logistics and everything else, you suddenly go, oh, power's a real problem.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
But here are some of the numbers, guys.
Okay.
This is this $1,000, right? Right now, Australia has 10.6 million households. That means there's 10.6 billion being sucked out of the economy every year. And this is just households. This isn't the other side. This isn't business. And businesses in Australia use twice as much power as the households, but I don't know what they're paying. That's not really coming out. And it also doesn't include government. Now, that's 10.6 billion that does not get spent on food, clothing, education, holidays and entertainment, rent, or 1,000 other things. That's money that's not going through the economy. It's just being siphoned off by the power companies. And already in 2025, that's over 6 billion. When I put that to a couple of Labor staffers, I said, do you know how much money it hasn't been spent on food, clothing, and rent and everything else? And they went, oh, crap. This is what it looks like over time. This is why economists shouldn't ever pick a fight with an engineer, because we can do math better. If you just hold that $1,000 constant, $1,000 for the next. Now, the reason I've taken this out, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, out to 2110, that's because with the Liberal nuclear plan, that's how long those nuclear power stations were going to last. They were going to go out to 2110. At 2110, so if you go just looking along it, and the other one, that's with the same $1,000, but every year it's going up 2.65%, which is what Australia's inflation rate has been very consistent at. So by 2030, what we're talking about is between 78 and $84 billion just being sucked out by the power stations. By 2040, that's 207 to 259 billion. By 2050, that's 355 to 520 billion. By 2110, if the $1,000 never changes, that's 1.65 trillion. At 2110, in 85 years' time, with inflation, that's 7.2 sucked out of Australian households. Because what Labor, Liberals never considered, and this is why you're going to be careful with an engineer and numbers, they never considered population growth, and they never considered inflation. I don't know, Steve, did you see any of the advertising that went on at the election?
No, well, I was there for the last election, of course. I unsuccessfly ran for the last election. So I think I've disappeared behind my own camera here. That's the
Liberals came out and said that they were going to do 38% nuclear. It was going to cost $330 billion. The Labor Party came out and everybody sort of like went, does that really sound right? And everybody sort of like went, it's going to cost more than that. Look at the British and their nuclear, and look at the Americans. It's going to cost more than that. And Labor came out and said, it's actually going to cost $600 billion. And you know how they calculated the $600 billion? They just took $330 billion, stuck it into an inflation calculator and projected it forward to 12 years. And that came out to be 600. What they didn't include, like if you're looking at that, let me just scroll it back a little bit. If you look at that 2040, they didn't include the 259 billion. And what's more, I've got another slide presentation that goes right into the details of how bad their plan was. And it actually was going to cost not 600 billion, but 970. And and that 970 on top of it, you've got to add that 520.
Yeah.
So it was going to be about 1.5 trillion over the next 25 years. And because if you go with the plan they had, there's no way energy prices are going to get better. And this is the thing that's going to be facing. This is at the moment, yes, this is an Australian problem, but if we don't get, coming back to this diagram, if you don't get that power prices done, that patch there down the lower left, that is going to bleed every household in your economy. It's just going to bleed them year after year.
Let's get to a bit more general stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of this comes out of the fact that economists don't understand the role of energy at all in production.
This is the actual end, Steve.
Yeah.
But yes, that's 7.2 trillion there. I don't know what the rest of it's going to cost, but GDP will be in Yeehaville, and economists will tell us how clever they are. And that is everything.
Okay.
Yeehaville.
Yeehaville, because there's I don't know any other way to describe this, is that this obsession with GDP, they're bleeding every household in Australia. And like at $1,000 a year, it's $19.23 a week. So you don't even notice it. It's a $20 note every week. But you take that and you add that up over decade after decade, and you increase with inflation, and it just becomes this giant mountain that crushes you. And here's the stupid thing. Economists are telling us, we need to save in our superannuation, what Americans call 401k, because, over the years, it snowballs. The interest, it accumulates. So that's what I've done. I've done the same sort of calculation. What they're saying we should do with our retirement savings, I've done the same for these energy costs. And I'm going, yeah, but you're telling us we should save that. And I'm telling you, yeah, but hang on. If you gave us back that $20 a week by just cheaper energy prices, that $7.2 trillion is what people retire on.
Yeah.
You end up with a gigantic mountain of money for all these people to retire on.
Yeah.
And you know who the Grattan Institute is.
What do you got to say, Steve? I know you want to chime in here.
Look, I want to get away from Australian numbers, mate. You're getting a bit too vague for people listening. It's $19.66 Australian isn't contributing to the argument about the role of energy in production.
But it's the same for every other country at the moment.
Yeah, I know,
Steve.
but I want to talk about the general stuff, and this is what I did in the book, which the chapter 13 that Ty wants to have a bit of a chat with Dave about. So, Dave, I'll let you roll on the questions. Let's start talking about energy and how economists don't understand it, which is what Tony's basic point is. That's why they're suffering up so badly.
Now, Dave, you have, while we were doing the presentation with Tony, you did read the entirety of chapter 13.
Exactly, and covered it all.
Have your questions ready. But what are your general thoughts overall so far?
I think I know that Steve will cover the points that he's got in the chapter, so I'm not going to try and dive in there. I think I'm going to get over my head. But the one thing that comes up a lot with talking about this is, for me, what industrial policy would make sense in these positions, given the changing technology, given renewables as an option. What industrial policy would make sense in a landscape like Australia? And I think that's part of the problem for me, because I mean, of course, there's politics involved here, there's vested interests, and there's the problems of economists with GDP, but there is also next generation technology coming along. So if we were thinking, right, well, we should just use the system that exists and just keep layering on more gas and coal powered stations, that always seems to me to not be looking ahead at all the opportunities we've got. So if storage is the problem for baseload, Tony Sieber's talked about this, and I don't think we're honestly thinking ambitiously enough when people talk about energy. I think Tony Sieber's talked about the fact that you could, if you think completely differently about how nations could have a system, and you stop, not you, Tony, but one stops obsessing about baseload, you change the system. You go, if we can roll out solar cheap enough, then on the shortest winter day, we have enough solar that is providing permanent power. Then the rest of the time you've got surplus, you turn that into there's a process that Paddy Lowe's doing in the UK to take hydrocarbon or take carbon out of the air, create hydrocarbons so that it's net neutral. When you burn it, you're just burning carbon that you took out of the air in the first place. But you use surpluses to do that and create new batteries of storage. So I guess it's not being done because we're not setting ourselves up for that sort of debate.
Exactly.
So I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm just saying industrial policy is set to try and replicate what we've done for the last 60 years. And I do think that's a problem because we don't talk about what we could do instead, kind of thing. That's my main observation.
Yeah, that's exactly on par. Is that our industrial policy is being basically written by people who have no idea how any of these industries work. Like most of them, like most economists, they've never been out on a mine site. They've never been in a power station. They've never been in a factory. They have no idea what goes on in any of these places. Like I've had a kind of a weird career. I got out of aerospace and crash landed in control systems. Did a lot of work around manufacturing. I met one of the guys who walked on the moon, one of the last two guys to walk on the moon. And he said, we're going back to the moon to mine it for helium-3 to put into nuclear fusion reactors. So I went,
amazing.
Okay,
who was that?
Harrison Schmidt. He was in Australia for the 30th anniversary of his moonwalk, and I met him. Really nice guy. He said, look into some of what we're doing. I wanted to go and repair satellites at that stage. And he said, yeah, that'd be good, except you can't get off the planet because nobody will help you do that because you'll kill the launch business. He said, but go and have a look at what me and some other people are proposing at the moment because you're the kind of person we're sort of looking for. And this was this helium-3 mining on the moon. And I went, okay, I've got American degree. I've got a background with robotics, manufacturing, all sorts of stuff like that. But if I go and learn how to build a mine, these Americans might go, well, let's send Tony to the moon. And I've been trying to be obnoxious enough that everybody would fund it.
Let's send Tony to
Go
the moon.
fund me.
Go fund me.
Send Tony to the moon.com.
We're not letting him back in Canada, but we're going to let him go to the moon.
Well, it's actually the technology. What I was doing in Saskatchewan was a sewage treatment plant, and it was using a new form of technology that was developed in Australia. Until the idiot who had control of that technology blew it all up. And that one of the reasons why I looked at that was I was like, that's exactly what we need to go to the moon, because the first thing you get a bunch of astronauts go to the moon, the first thing you're going to need is a toilet. Right, this is one of the it's one of the fundamental things. You go and build a mine. Like one of the things I learned building mine sites in Australia is you go out there and you go, well, there's nothing. Right, Australia is 80% nothing. It's sticks, twigs, kangaroos, and a lot of heat. And you've got
Labor Party politicians, and
Labor Party politicians behind every rock, and a Liberal Party guy stuffing a piece of dynamite under the rocks. But you go out there and you, like, as I say to every young engineer, I say, if you want to learn engineering, go out and build a mine site, because you've got to do things like housing, infrastructure, water treatment, clean water treatment, wastewater treatment. You've basically got to do everything. Like I'll give you a funny one. Jeff Bezos a couple of years ago said, I want to take iron ore production, steel production off the planet. Solar energy will be amazing. We won't need coal. It'll be all clean, it'll be brilliant. Now, when he said that, I was working at the Mount Tom Price mine in Australia, which Steve will be able to tell you, when they opened, it was one of the biggest in the world at 20 million tonnes a year. I can do the quick math on that. You basically convert, for every 20 tonnes of iron ore, you get about 12 to 14 tonnes of iron. it just so happens that that's a good number to use because 14 tons is what a space shuttle can land with. So if you have 20 tons of iron ore, that's one space shuttle flight. If you have 20 million tons of iron ore, that's 1 million flights. We only ever did 135 space shuttle flights, and Jeff Bezos wants to do 1 million for just one line. Australia at the moment produces over 920 million.
All right, so we're gonna start tackling Steve's chapter 13. Everybody, make sure you hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. Notification bell too. It helps me out a lot. I appreciate everybody that does that, and I appreciate all the chatters in the chat today. Steve, chapter 13 starts off mainly with the critique of the neoclassical use of the Cobb-Douglas function. I want you to kind of start from there. What's wrong with that, and what are the alternatives?
Okay. Well, the Cobb-Douglas production function was invented in the late 1920s by an economist who collected a whole lot of index numbers on output, labor, and capital, and that was Douglas. And then he wanted to fit to a mathematical function, so he took it to a mathematician called Cobb. And Douglas had been inspired by the conventional economic theory of income distribution, which is that you get paid your marginal product. And that's the equation that the mathematician tried. So he said output is labor raised to some power, which reflects labor's contribution to production, times capital raised to 1 minus that power, which represents capital's contribution to production. And when they did a regression, they got a value for the coefficient of the labor of 0.74, or 0.75, I think, and the coefficient for capital 0.25, and they happen to be almost exactly what the income shares were of labor and capital in national output. So the fact that you got that very close correlation was a major reason why economists adopted it, because they said, well, it verifies what we think is income, the method of income distribution, it fits the data, and bang, off they went with Cobb-Douglas production functions. I took a closer look at that paper. And it turned out that the reason you had such a high correlation between the output side of the equation, which is GDP effectively, and the inputs, labor and capital raised to these two powers, was because they're both, all three series were rising, and when they fell, they all fell at the same time. So they got a correlation coefficient for it of 0.97, which is huge. But they then said, well, it's also a very high correlation for changes in GDP, changes in labor, and changes in capital. And then what tends to happen all the time when I check, pivotal neoclassical papers, I found a logical error. And that is the way that they said they looked at the changes was they used a 3-year moving average, and they deducted the data from a 3-year moving average of the data. That still left exactly the same trends in place. So when I did the way you do a modern comparison of changes in one variable to changes in another is log differences. And when I did exactly the same Cobb-Douglas data, rather than getting a coefficient of labor being 0.75, which fits with the theory, and that's why they adopted it, you get a correlation coefficient of minus 0.11. Which means it just doesn't work. The data didn't support the Cobb-Douglas production function in the first place. But the reason economists adopted it is that it gave them a theory of production, which was consistent with their theory of income distribution. And that's why they've run with it ever since. So they've stuck with these numbers, labor getting roughly, say, 70% of GDP, so the coefficient of labor is 0.7. Capital gets roughly 0.30%, so the coefficient is 0.3. And that's what virtually every neoclassical model uses these days. But it has two flaws. One is that there's no justification for those correlations at all. The coefficients just aren't supported by the data. But the main thing is it leaves energy out completely. So what I realized back in 2017 or 2018, I think, that you can't bring energy in, as economists do, by tacking it on as a third factor. So if you see how they do try to bring energy in, when they occasionally say, well, yes, you need energy for production, they say, well, output is labor to one power, capital to another, and energy to one minus those two powers. So they get constant returns to scale. But the value they give for energy is about 0.04. And what that means is that if you double energy input, you'll increase output by 4%. which is nonsense. Okay? It just doesn't fit the data at all. When you look at the data, it's a one-for-one fit. Change energy, you change output exactly at the same level. And the reason is that what GDP comes down to being is energy turns into useful work. That's what GDP fundamentally is, which is one reason why we do get this very close fit between GDP and energy. I might actually share my screen because I know I'm getting a bit vague, talking a bit too generally there. So
well, you used an analogy in the chapter, Steve, which caught my eye, which was you said you go to fill up your car with energy, or you go to fill up your car, you can't fill it up with capital or with labor.
Yeah,
and I thought that was really nice, and I wondered if you could unpack that further for me.
Yeah, well, I'll quickly show this data here because this when I first put this together, it blew my socks off because when I come up with a new argument like the role of energy in production, and then go look at the data, my reaction is if I was trying to fudge the information to support my case, I wouldn't dare make up data that is as strong as I find in the original data. So this is plotting energy data from the OECD against gross world product data from the World Bank, so two different sources. One is measured in 2017 American dollars, I think. The other's in 1 million tons of oil equivalent. And you see that I'm graphing energy usage on the left-hand side in black and GDP on the right-hand side in red. And if you get, they're very close fit to each other, and you get a huge correlation between the two, but that's because they're both rising at the same time. So when you look at the change in energy and the change in GDP, you can see how they move lockstep with each other. They're the same scale, and the correlation coefficient is still, off the scale, 0.88 between the changes in GDP and the changes in energy. So what it's telling us is that GDP fundamentally is energy. That's what it comes down to. So the whole talk about decoupling GDP from energy is just stupid because you're saying you want to decouple GDP from GDP. We are entirely dependent upon energy for the state of our consumption levels today. And it's when we're going to be forced to stop using fossil fuels because of the damage from global warming, GDP will plunge, because what GDP really is energy turned into useful work. With less energy, there's less useful work, there'll be less GDP. And that's the threat like we face in the very near future.
I've been reading Hannah Ritchie's book, Not the End of the World. She's covered a lot of, she's a very nuanced statistician, as far as I can see. One of the things that comes up, because she used to be very alarmist about a lot of things, which she's somewhat moderated on, but one of the things that came up was about energy, especially this one, Steve, with the GDP and energy in lockstep, and this idea that we can decarbon, if you like, from it. But she was pointing out that although because, and you've talked about this before, because of Jensen's paradox, we can increase renewables, but would they increase our overall use because we're increasing
they substitute, they add to usage rather than substituting.
Exactly, Jensen's. And I think
no, Jevons. It's got a V, not an N.
Jevons, you're right. So she went back and had a look at whether or not we're making a difference, because at least for her, anecdotally, she was noticing that her own particular footprint, where she thought she was using a lot of energy, her personal footprint was way lower than her parents and her grandparents. And then she realized that if you cumulatively look at the world population per capita, we've peaked out on what we use per person in terms of energy use, but we're not, because of Jevons, we're not globally doing that as a whole species. And that's what's weird. Whether or not we will top out and slowly stop producing, not more energy, more CO2 per person, not more energy. Whether we can solve it or not is still an open question. And it might be a catastrophe, we don't know, but we have at least on a per capita basis topped out on the amount of CO2 that we burn because of the increase in renewables.
Yeah. But
I'll send you a link for that if you want, and we'll make sure that is, they've interpreted that correctly or she has. But
I got a quick question.
Just smile for a second, Tony, so I can do my my thumbnail. So, how do I do this?
Have a smile. Come on, Tony.
Come on. Hey,
That'll
There
do.
we go.
Okay.
We got it. We got it. I always do those after.
Just a quickie on the whole data ignorance thing, Steve. You know how Donald Trump sacked the labor statistics girl this week? The guy he had, I just went and clicked on to see if he had a Wikipedia page. Yes, he's got a Wikipedia page.
Right.
Do you know what's on it? A direct link to his PhD thesis at Northern Illinois. And the abstract is there for the world to see. Do you know what it says in the abstract? Repeatedly. There's theory. We've done surveys that kind of match, but the data when we do regression doesn't line up. And this guy's come into that role, and he's been somebody who for years, while he's been at the Heritage or Cato Institute, he's been saying the data is wrong. He's saying the theories are right because the surveys back them up. And you got to remember, surveys are always biased to whoever's filling them out. And the data doesn't agree.
So the data must be wrong.
And he's saying the data must be wrong. And this is a huge, so all your arguments about the whole Cobb Douglas and how they've based it off data didn't line up with the data in the end when you look at the data properly.
With the theory still.
This guy this guy's promoting it. Like I couldn't believe it. I'm like going, I've got to talk to Steve about this because you look at it and it happens
all the time. I mean, they've got a set of beliefs and don't let the data get in. I've forgotten who it's from, but one of the great scientists made a comment about the great tragedy of science is a beautiful theory destroyed by an ugly fact. Well, that doesn't happen in economics. The ugly facts get ignored and the beautiful theory lives on. And that's the great problem. For example, one of my favorite things, I think I cover it in that chapter on energy, is that there's a German economist who I really enjoy disliking him, I think it was Rudy Bornhoff, I think the name is. And he was trashing the post-Keynesian production function, which has output as capital divided by a capital output ratio. He trashed it by saying, if we assume that markets are competitive, so the prices of factors of production are their marginal products, then the Leontief production function, the one post-Keynesians use, makes nonsensical predictions about prices, et cetera, And he said, therefore, it must be ruled out. But what the Leontief production function gives you is a one-for-one relationship between GDP and energy. And what I've worked out logically is that what's called the capital output ratio is actually, it's like the second law of thermodynamics. It's the efficiency with which machinery turns energy into useful work. That's the inverse of the capital output ratio. And there's a linear fit between GDP and energy, which the Leontief production function returns you. Now, Rudy says, oh, that's got to be nonsensical, but it's actually the data. So what it means is actually nonsensical is not the data. It's the assumption that prices paid for labor and capital and energy reflect their marginal products. It's the neoclassical theory that's wrong, not the data.
Yeah, well, this is the amazing thing.
Rudy Backman.
Rudy
Backman. That's Rob is asking. Rudy Backman.
No, go and have his name's DJ Antoni. It's on Wikipedia, and there's a link where it's got all of the usual data of when they were born and where they went to school and everything. At the bottom of it is a link to it, and I was like, oh yeah, I wonder if I could read it. And sure enough, you can read the whole thing if you want to read all 140 odd pages of it. But I just looked through the abstract and went, somebody gave this guy a PhD. He's sitting there saying he's got theory and the data says his theory is wrong. And his argument is the data is wrong because my theory is my theory.
That's very Austrian.
It's like, but it's like, have you ever heard of the scientific method?
I think they employ it. This is the trouble.
No. So Tony,
it's
Tony
like
and Steve.
As an engineer,
that's again why I wrote that. That's again
nuts.
back to the book again. The title of the book is Money and Macroeconomics and First Principles for Elon Musk and Other Engineers. So Tony, you better get a copy and pull it apart for me. But the idea is engineers would take a first principles approach. And then when you put it together, you get the exact opposite of neoclassical theory. You get cycles rather than equilibrium.
Do you want to?
You get energy having a vital role rather than being ignored. So an engineer's approach to economics gives them completely different results, not just to argument by analogy, which is what Musk has been doing, but to neoclassical theory in general.
Dave, what were you? Dave was going to ask a question, so let him get in here.
Yeah.
Well, it was over. If GDP and energy are in lockstep, and if we didn't need to and didn't want to use GDP as a measurement, what options do we suddenly have in a crisis where we can't use fossil fuels anymore, for example? But
look, the point to me about that really tight fit between GDP and energy, is that it's showing that the reason the fit exists is people say, for example, a car accident adds to GDP, and that's ridiculous. A car reduces welfare, but a car accident uses energy. When you have the crash, you've got to have a tow truck that drives there using energy to pull the cars apart. They take it back, it fixes them using paddle beating, using energy, etc., etc. So while GDP is a very poor measure of welfare, it's a very accurate measure of our use of energy. And once you see that link, you see that when I do the correlation of change in gross world product to change in energy consumption and get a correlation coefficient for that of 0.88, this is with annual data across the entire globe. So, you could get much, much finer data and get a better correlation still. But it's a huge correlation. So what it tells you is to a first order of magnitude, you can substitute energy for GDP. Gotcha. And therefore say rising GDP means rising energy. Now, that's why we're in such a pickle with global warming, because getting so much of our energy from carbon-based fuels, we're destroying the biosphere. And at some point, and I mean, definitely in the lifetime of most people in this chat, if not all, that is going to cause catastrophic damage to the production system, and we'll be panicked. How the hell do we reduce consumption? We've got to reduce energy usage. Now, partially that comes back to some of the stuff Tony was talking about earlier before we started the show, about the amount of energy which is actually wasted. Only a tiny proportion of the primary energy actually gets through to being used in the consumption. But even so, you get that incredibly tight correlation. So if we are going to if we wanted to survive, or we have to have a dramatic fall in energy consumption, then we have to have engineering precision about what we use energy for, and how much we can reduce the waste we're currently generating in getting energy from its primary form to its final form.
There's actually a Mark Blythe pointed something out a couple of years ago. He said, it's one of the engineers he knew. He said, if they just triple glazed, how architects love these glazed monstrosities of parking cities. They're horribly energy inefficient. And Mark Blythe, some engineer that Mark knows, I don't know if he's at Brown or whatever, Mark Blythe came out and said, they've done the calculations. If they were to triple glaze every window in every building in America will meet its 2050 obligations for Paris, Kyoto.
Just by better insulation.
Because it'll save so much, just by so much energy. And when I first heard that, I was like, yeah. Actually, once you start getting into what happens to how much energy it takes to heat up the house and everything like that.
But we've got a freeze zone. Speaking of energy,
a couple of months ago, he popped up with this one. He said, guess what? We don't need to triple glaze them. 3M have come out with this film that you just stick on the inside of your windows. Like, Ty, you need to look this up because you're in Canada and it gets really cold. And it's not like people hadn't tried films on the end, but this stuff is like adding a third pane of glass. And it's incredibly cheap. When this stuff really takes off in the marketplace, and 3M aren't the only ones pushing it, that's going to be one of the hottest things, because if you can suddenly like one of the things I've been trying to talk to the Labor Party with in Australia is the way to get, because if you look at the breakdown of who's in your economy, about half your economy is really struggling. If you can reduce their energy bills, they get that money back, they spend it in the economy, and it does this to your economy. You just got this giant pile of cash spinning around. And one of the ways to get that money is to actually reduce how much energy their houses actually need to do what they're doing. If you just increase their efficiency, because if at the end of the day, as Steve, who's the girl who does that podcast called Planet Critical? Scottish girl.
Yeah, Rachel.
Yeah. She had a French guy on who was the guy who said this 5% figure.
Yeah.
If you only go from 5 to 6%, that's 20% better efficiency. So you don't have to actually go that far and then all of a sudden, yeah, crypto, don't talk to me about it. It's fake anyway. Mark Blythe said, if you believe it's money, then you're an idiot. He said that 6 years ago.
Actually, let's give a serious response to our viewer. For me, you know, crypto is the Dutch tulip craze, just using a whole lot of energy, and it's actually something pretty important that we should address. And I always try to get Steve to give an answer on this. And Steve, I want your
Once we lose lots of white people from some part of the northern hemisphere, and people realize this is white Republican voters would be a good way to start. Lose a couple of million of those, and suddenly they realize they do have to look up. When that happens, the easiest way to reduce energy consumption is to ban Bitcoin, ban international trade, not international trade, but ban tourism. And there's the third. I forgot my normal third one is. Yeah, but you shut down international tourism and shut down Bitcoin, you'd reduce energy consumption by about 10%. So I think that's what's going to happen at some point. The tulip trades will continue until you realize you can't afford tulips.
Great. Yeah. So there you go, AK Liberty Man. I saw your comments. I was going to try to get to it, but that's pretty much what I think. Hold on, Tony. Hold on, man. I kind of agree with Steve there, and so there's nothing more I can say. But I kind of want Dave's opinion too on this question, because it ties in with energy. But crypto is becoming, you know, the red eye frickin' buzzword and buzz, you know, topic on social media. You know, what's your opinion on that relationship with energy, Dave?
Well, with when it comes to energy, they're not all created equal. It's Bitcoin in particular that grinds away using energy, and others have changed the way they measure what they are. Ethereum, for example, so that it doesn't need the same level of energy to crunch the numbers. It just doesn't. So, yeah, but it's still pointless, because once you understand the whole where the money is coming from, it's coming from deficit spending in fiat, you know, nation state fiat spending. It's the only reason that it can exist, is that you've got to have deficit spending. As soon as you don't, and although it's early doors, and I know, Ty, you've been measuring this to some degree, as soon as you don't have deficit spending, which could happen either deliberately or from some financial crisis, then people need to cash out that crypto, and guess what happens to the price? It collapses. So it's a complete furphy. I mean, it's just, I don't. So does it have any redeeming features? I don't know. If things stayed stable, it might be like having artisanal wine or some sort of, you know, exotic store of value that might be fun. But apart from the funsies, it's not a serious contender for a new economic space. That's what.
This just in: Dave compared crypto to fine wine that barely anybody will use in the real world. I want to. So before we close out the stream, we've got to kind of hit the. I'm going to take Liberman's story tweet. We got to hit the big news in economics this week, and that's Donald Trump attempting, or may have, firing a Federal Reserve governor. And this is huge news in the world of economics, macroeconomics, especially in monetary policy. And that's the independence of central banks around the world from their political systems. Now, there's a few sides to the story. Obviously, there's the modern monetary side of things theory. Sorry, MMT. That says, simply the central banks are a pseudo department of the government, and what do you expect? And then, of course, there's the flip side of it that says, political, the political body of a nation is not efficient enough to handle the operations of a monetary system. And I want Steve's opinion on this. I know Steve and I are both very friendly to MMT, so we see, a central bank is essentially a loose arm of government. But I think, at least from my perspective, I'll let Steve speak from himself. I don't think it's realistic that we have politicians meddling in that process of monetary policy. Governments change every 4 years. In order to change a policy, it has to go through Congress, a congressional policy. And that's why we set up a more independent, governor board system to manage interest rates. I'm curious on your thoughts about what happened this week, Steve, and what the impact is.
To me, it's brutal. This is fascism. Okay, Trump is doing what a classic fascist does, kicking out anybody who gives information he doesn't like, as he did to the Bureau of Labor Stats person some weeks back. Then kicking out anybody who doesn't do what he wants in terms of setting interest rate policy and so on. So that, to me, it's extremely damaging for that reason more than anything else. But the irony with the central banks is that one of the reasons the politicians were happy to hand over the role of setting interest rates to economists in the central banks was that during the 1970s, they were putting rates up, and the politician putting interest rates up copped shit from the electorate. So handed over to the experts was very desirable for them. Then we had about a 15 or 20 year period or more, less than 30 years, of falling interest rates. So what was happening with the central banks? They were dropping rates over time, not quite knowing why they were doing it. They thought inflation was falling, so lower rates were required that way and so on. But they have the thing I see dangerous about having central banks controlling the interest rates is that they're following neoclassical theory. And the reason for putting rates up is they believe that if you increase interest rates, you reduce inflationary expectations, and that's what actually causes inflation. So they've got a theories at the bottom of the garden model of what interest rates actually do. And the corollary of that is they are anti-fiscal policy. Now, when you look at what actually happens in the real world, using accounting to take a look at the processes rather than neoclassical theory, fiscal policy is extremely effective. Neoclassicals argue it's not, because rational agents, the way they define rational, do the opposite of what the government wants and counteract the government behavior. That's total bollocks. If the government spends more money, it creates more money in the economy, and that enables more economic activity. So fiscal policy is very powerful. Interest rate policy is fairly weak, and mainly causes changes in asset prices rather than causing changes in economic activity, unless you crush the economy with them. So I'm in favor of central bank independence in one sense, but I want different people running it.
Yeah, so, and I can agree, and I should have nuanced this a little bit more. As for interest rate policy, like you said, it's a blunt tool. You can crush the economy and stop inflation with it, but you're going to put a lot of people, in soup kitchens doing that. But the other aspect, and the bigger, not talked about aspect of central banking, is managing reserve balances, the interbank market, the payment system, right? And that's the part where I think we need to make sure that's independent from politics altogether, because we have Donald Trump now, and let's face it, Donald Trump has his own personal agenda, and it's frightening to think that he can. Now, I don't know if this actually goes down. From what I understand, the governor, I forget her name, Cook, she is suing, and it's going right to the Supreme Court. I don't know. Yeah. The central bank hasn't said she's been removed from the position, so she may still be operating there. And it is just fascinating, because it is a clash between the Treasury, the executive branch, and a nation's central bank, and it hits at the core philosophy of how we structure our monetary systems. And I just find it very fascinating. And I think, in this rare case, and I agree with you, monetary policy in itself is based on neoclassical theory, and that in itself is bunk.
Yeah.
In this case, I'm on the side of the Federal Reserve.
And so am I. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm on the side, I think Congress, and it will need like law researchers to really flush this out. Congress kind of set it out that you need a valid reason to remove a Fed governor. And right now, Trump's throwing out some fraudulent mortgage fraud argument that doesn't seem
real
to
estate,
actually
which is
exist.
really amusing.
Which is ironic, isn't it?
Yeah,
Considering
yeah.
his history with real estate. Dave, I don't know if you've been listening to any of that going on in the news over in the UK, if you catch any of that, but if you have, do you have any thoughts on that specific situation with Trump firing Cook, or just the basic idea of central bank independence from the political realm?
I'm sympathetic to the idea that you could, because culturally it's been sold as a way to solve the tool to use against inflation. I'm sympathetic to the idea of the MMT idea of making ZIRP the policy, and then you can have private banks, set their own rates, and it takes the sting out of the argument. So for me, that's the reason why I think independence or not, it should just be a ZIRP policy. But then, of course, once that's the case, it's hard to make the argument for keeping the Fed independent, isn't it? Because that's the main weapon they have.
Well,
so you take all the power out of the argument.
Well, like I was saying, the Fed actually, it has beyond the popular demand of what is their policy, right? They do serve a function for the commercial banking system as a settlement system, and it's very complex, right? Whether it's purchasing, government assets, right, to change the level of balances that Feds use to exchange, whether it's going on the open market with other central banks and purchasing and selling currency, buying gold, right? And that financial stability aspect, there's a whole lot that goes behind the scenes. As much as we to criticize interest rate policy, they serve a good function. And the second you bring the political realm into it, as much as I love democracy, I love that we have other parliaments like here in Canada or in the UK, or Senate republic systems down in the US. It provides a public discourse that's open and transparent. There's inefficiencies to that. And in the modern world, we need kind of a faster institution to make policy changes. And that comes in the form of central banks. So to that degree, they have to remain independent, in my humble opinion.
No, I was thinking more. Independence is fine, but go further. Make it that you're democratizing that as a separate body. But at the moment, it's a closed shop of ideologues. So if you keep it independent, then perhaps we should have direct voting for those people, like we vote for.
That's actually one area I'm strictly opposed to that idea. I think a large part of America's problems come out of the fact that it has elections for virtually everything. You elect your local sheriff, you elect your local judges, and stuff like that. And elections are based fundamentally on narcissistic personality disorder tests. Okay?
But I don't know what weapon we have, though, Steve. If we don't have democracy.
Well, in that, what I prefer is the sortition concept, where you basically
we agree on that, definitely.
Intelligent random number generator to pick people in positions like that. But you also want to have system experts involved in running complex parts of the economy. And this is the trouble, is we've got economists in there, neoclassical economists. They're experts on their model of the economy. They're not experts on the economy at all. And that's the real major danger. Now, Trump, because he's blundering in the way that he does, is trying to seeing it's individuals who are at fault. It's actually a body of thought, a theory, which is at fault. And so long as the economists are dominated by neoclassical economists, the wrong people are going to run monetary policy. And that's a real dilemma.
So
I don't think you get around it.
Give an alternative bit to just a slightly different take on the whole independence thing.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the problems that I've come across, and this is my big beef as an engineer with economists interfering in the engineering space. One of the problems I see with these independent central banks is it because they're so consistent in what they do. But we can argue over whether they do the right thing or wrong thing, but they're consistent. One of the major problems that's happening with elections all over the world and why we got Donald Trump is that it didn't matter for about the last 30 years whether people voted in Australia, whether they voted Labor or Liberal, whether they voted Tory or Labor in Britain, whether they voted Democrat or Republican in America. The economics did not change.
Oh yeah,
And
they
when
read out of the same. They read out of the
yeah,
same
it's not the same-
hymn book.
Yeah, and when you've got an economy that's geared to work for about 10% of the population, and if you look at the Congressional Budget Office, and Ty, can you bring up my screen, and I'll show everybody where to find this data. Can you bring up my screen for about a minute, and I'll show everybody where to find it.
You've got to do it
Tony,
yourself,
I think that's
Tony.
a really good point. I think you've hit on something that's really super important.
Choose entire screen, share. Okay, right, Ty, have you got my screen coming up?
Yep.
Okay, right, fine. Everybody, what you do is you put Congressional Budget Office Family Wealth into Google, and you will come up with this report here at the top. When you go and click on that, you will get to here. Now, down the bottom, and you'll find the other reports that went through to, if you see where my little hand is there was the one that went through to 2019, and that was an update of the one in 2013. Now, one of the things they did change with all of this is that if you read through all of this fine print here, is that they said they started to add in a lot of other things like social security. Now, when you come and look at this graph here, and you look at that, this is where we were in 2022. The top 10% of Americans had 119.6 trillion. The next 40% of America has only got 66 trillion. So it's 4 times as many people for basically half the wealth.
Yeah.
The bottom 10% is only 12.8 trillion. So they're basically 1/10 the wealth for 5 times the population. The bottom 90% on that, according to, and this is Congressional Budget Office, these people are not allowed to lie. It's basically, if they put out a report like this and it's knowingly got lies, they go to jail because that's lying to Congress. So when you look at, this is the sort of data that absolutely crunches a lot of things. Like if you look through here, there's a really interesting bit here. Like if you come back to 2007, 2008, this dip that's here, that's the GFC. And this is the recovery of it. And when you look, here's the Obama years. Look at how much money these people gained. They went from, just in these 3 years, they went from 76 to 100 trillion in 3 years.
So we'll go back and that's more of a wealth inequality thing. We want to kind of kind of flush out the central bank issue. One of the things that we do. Hold on, Tony. One of the things that we do up here in Canada is we have a finance minister, and he owns in theory the entirety of the Central Bank of Canada, and he is part of the process of monetary policy. And so if it's desired by the federal government to overshoot the Canadian governor, Bank of Canada, he can. And that's something that doesn't exist in the state, where there's that unity in their board of governors, where down there it's the Treasury secretary isn't directly now. Back in the Bernanke, Tim Geithner days, they would have weekly lunches together, and they would discuss monetary policy. And Tim Geithner, of course, came from the New York Fed, so he was well versed with central bank policy. And that's one of the things that could come out of this once Trump's voted out of office and he loses the Congress in a year and a half, hopefully. That's one of the things that could come out of this, is actually Congress could sit down and do some amendments to the Federal Reserve Act, and what inclusion there are of political officials, like Steve was saying, we can't have an election for every decision that's made going forward. It's too inefficient. But what we could do is place the political system into the realm of central bank policy, whether it's on the board meetings, so that a political official could, in theory, override the central bank if they had to, but there would be bounds set by Congress itself. So, okay, the Treasury Secretary says, no, I'm overriding this Board of Governors policy rate. I don't like it. I'm overriding it. It gets shipped down to Congress, and then this would be an emergency situation, and then Congress would vote, okay, no, we're going with Federal Reserve policy, or no, as the government, we need to step in here. The independence of central bank policy has become too extreme, and it's a security risk to national security. That's something the states could do, right? And there is a sharp division. Your camera, you're mirrored on your camera.
Yeah, I know.
So,
yeah, but does everybody know that book? That's
No.
been a big influence on my thinking. That's Angrynomics by Mark Blythe. And
Yeah.
what he basically said is Angrynomics is the state when the bulk of the population believes that the economic system is rigged against them, and they've got no way to change things. And that's my point about independent central banks, is if all they're doing is looking after the big end of town, to 10% of the population, then what option do they give the general voting public? Look, I'll tell you right now, Trump will win the midterms in a landslide because, one, I watch the politics. The Democrats are so utterly, hopelessly disorganized at the moment, there's not an option. They've got no economic anything. They don't have a policy. If somebody handed them a policy, they wouldn't be able to recognize that that's how bad they are. And you've got this massive block of the American population, just like if you look at Britain at the moment, you're over there, Dave. Look at Labor won in this giant landslide. Less than a year later, they're screaming their heads off that how come the
Farage will
economy's
likely win over here for the same reasons that you're talking about, Tony.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, yeah.
We've got and I can tell you right now, this is my great fear in Australia, is if Labor don't sort out the energy thing, because the energy thing can fix a lot of things very, very quickly, means you can industrialize, you can give jobs to people, right? So if you fix the energy, you can fix a lot of other things. But it also might be, like, you think about it, if you were to suddenly go and triple glaze all of the buildings in America or put the magic 3M film in, that's going to reduce how much energy is being consumed out of the power companies. So that's going to lower GDP. And if you have got a system run by economists who are obsessed with GDP going up, the last thing they want is for energy use to go down, because that'll reduce their GDP, and it'll all. And what are they going to do? What are they going to tell anybody? But then again, you could turn around to people and say, yes, GDP on this part is going down. But if you wait long enough, all these people with that money, after they've paid down some of their debt, they're going to start spending.
Now,
and when that's
in aggregate, I can believe everything you're saying, Tony, but I don't think conventional economists actually know any of what you're saying. So I wouldn't suggest that there's a conspiracy that they don't want to talk about energy because then the gig is up. They are energy blind, as Steve Keynes was on a famous podcast once. What's that called? Nate Hagen's energy blind, really. So they don't know those details at all.
Yeah, he's actually a pretty smart guy in a lot of ways. He's a little bit far out there on the whole great simplification, but he's basically right on the energy blindness. Is that it's just that they're blind to it because they're so hyper focused on this one number. And as long as that number's going in the right direction, it's okay. It's like they're like a pilot flying a plane and he's only looking at the altimeter. He's not looking at any other instrument, so he doesn't know that the engines are overheating, or he doesn't know that he's banked over or whatever. You can't just look at one parameter and say that's everything. And this is what's like, and this is why I can't see Trump. I can see Trump ending up with more power not less power with the
Yeah.
midterms. I can see Farage winning in a landslide, and that because who's held him accountable? Like, think about Farage. He said, let's do Brexit. And the moment the vote went through, he resigned his position in the European Parliament. He'd been elected by the people of Britain to get them out of Europe. And he said, well, he could have said, look, okay, I'm the guy. I've won the vote. I've got the mandate. I'm here. I'll negotiate it. Instead, what did he do? He ran from it because he actually didn't have a plan at all. He never thought he'd win the Brexit vote. So he never had a plan. That's why he's run away. But here, what you've now got is a loose cannon, and you've got a Labor Party like, I'll tell everybody, if you want to go and see something that'll amaze you, Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell interviewed Rachel Reeves on their podcast called Leading. And about halfway through it, she is literally channeling Margaret Thatcher. You know, Steve, you know the housewives analogies that Margaret Thatcher used? Yet Rachel Reeves used it. It's there. It's in the middle of the podcast. If you go and watch it, Steve, you'll fall over laughing. She's quoting Margaret Thatcher, and she's the Labor chancellor.
What are you going to say, Dave?
The Farage phenomenon, as it's seen, apart from the fact that he's getting an enormous amount of airtime, which people could argue about fairness given the number of seats they've got, is that the reason he's getting cut through is the actual policies people do go and look up. And one of the ones that stood out in the election, which I don't know why Labor didn't just nick, was he was going to raise the tax threshold to £20,000, which if Tony was talking about people who just don't believe in the system and think it's rigged. If you see that policy, you go, that's going to give me some relief. And that's what's going on, is a lot of people are going, well, yeah, there's the immigration stuff. Well, that's talking my language. But this actual policy, this is getting me on side. People that don't consider themselves particularly concerned about immigration, they're like, those are actual policies that economically make sense to them. And it takes the foot off your neck economically. It works.
Yeah, that's what
so
Trump's
that's
done.
what I'm saying.
You're exactly right, Dave. That's exactly what because I watch a lot of this stuff.
Steve, Tony, Steve, what were you going to say?
I think it's quite likely Farage is going to win. The other wild card, of course, is Jeremy Corbyn's party and George Galloway's party, which are giving left-oriented messages there. But they're both still caught up in believing the household myth. And I'm going to be doing my best to shake them out of that. I'm actually meeting up with I'm speaking at Corbyn's conference, and I hope to get people to realize that they're following a set of myths about the economy. And when you do it realistically, the government should run a deficit, and the deficit should fund things like the National Health Service, building power plants, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope I get away with it. That's my book, by the way. Thanks for putting it up there finally. That's a little image from Grok, of all things. I wanted to stun Elon Musk watching a rocket crash over textbooks on engineering mathematics. So that's a rather nice outcome, and they're very pleased with that. And the content is challenging to Musk's beliefs, but something any engineer could read and understand. So if you haven't yet got a copy, please do. It's in paperback and it's in Kindle, and it's how economics should be done, and it's something which is completely compatible with how engineers think.
Now, we're actually, so over the next number of weeks, we're going to kind of pick apart this book in a good way, Steve, in a good way. But we're going to go chapter by chapter, or maybe couple chapters per live stream. So we'll go through the whole thing. We kind of, did the energy thing today, but we'll spend a lot more time on it because I think it's very important. All of Steve's work is really, each one I think gets a little more important to me. This one, a lot more modeling in it, and that stuff really interests me, just like why the manifesto really interested me, because it was an integration of economic theory and modeling. So we're gonna pick apart this book over the next few weeks, probably a month, and we're gonna find out a lot more about what Steve's talking about. But we're at 2 hours. I'm getting tired. I want to go eat a Subway sandwich. I don't know if you guys have Subways in your part of the world, but
Not in Amsterdam, I've got to say, but they're damn good food.
They're everywhere.
Yeah,
they're so
5 a.m. breakfast for Tony. Yeah.
my wife brought me home a nice one, so I'm really happy about that. But anyways, guys, thanks for yapping,
Yep.
not yakking,
Pleasure.
yapping
Yapping,
for 2
yapping.
hours.
Good to see you, Tony. Thanks for sharing that, mate.
Yep. So we'll see you all next week. Okay.
Yep.
Actually, I won't be seeing you
See you
next week.
then.
I'm going to be in the UK, so I can't take part next week, but I can be there the week after.
What are you doing in the
Yeah.
UK?
I can't tell you.
Oh, Jesus,
Top secret.
Top secret.
I'll tell you off air.
Okay, everybody. It was
I
nice.
like those stalkers.
We'll
Those
see you
economic stalkers.
We'll see you next week. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe button, notification bell. Make comments on the video after it's done. That helps with the algorithm. See you later. Bye-bye.
You are now relearning economics.